thank you for you all being here tonight with me. And so I'm very happy to share my research with you. So as Preston already mentioned, I'm currently working on my MA thesis in the fields of philosophy and psychoanalysis. And I'm really very glad to have Brache Ettinger as my supervisor. So for those of you who maybe don't know her or don't know her work, she's one of the most important feminist philosophers and psychoanalysts and artists as well. And she rethinks human subjectivity as a creative mutual coexistence beyond male or phallic narratives. So this attitude is also then situated between ethics and aesthetics, which is also really interesting for me. And she also suggests alternative forms of how we as humans might relate to the world. So, and this attitude she has famously presented as the matrixial, or the matrixial theory. So I'm really glad that she's part of GCAS and that I have the opportunity to work together with her and to learn from her. So my interest in her theory became obvious in the research process of my PhD thesis in contemporary art and artistic research. My dissertation then was titled Being Together with the World Without Us, Performative Investigations into the Traumatized Planetary Space. And it was about the question simply how it is possible to relate to the traumatized planet that we are all encountering in a non-reductive and affirmative way. And this then also rose the question, so which forms of thinking and acting have to be formulated for that? So this was then also about suggesting a counterpoint, perhaps, to post-humanist discourses and about a sensible and performative and also feminine form of praxis of relating to the planetary environment of the actual scene we are currently living in. So already in my dissertation, thinking was very present, and I somehow had the feeling that I want to go one step further and relate my my scientific and also my artistic praxis to her thinking even more immediately, and so to develop my thesis with her personal supervision. In short, the thesis that I'm developing right now is about investigating the relation between humans and nature, and about considerably rethinking this relation with Ettinger's feminine matrixial theory. The working title of my thesis, I don't know if some of you maybe had the chance of taking a look into my manuscript. They also put the working title. So for now it is called Thread Suns Above the Grey-Black Wastes, Step to a Planetary Coexistence, with particular reference to Sigmund Freud, Martin Heidegger, and Brache Ettinger. So for now it's just a working title, but I quite like it for now because it's somehow maybe precise in what I'm aiming for. The first part of the working title is taken from a poem by Paul Celan, and I would like to read that for now. It's a very short poem, and it's called Thread Suns, or in German it's Fadensonnen, and it goes like this. Thread suns above the grey-black wastes. A tree-high thought grasps the light tone. There are still songs to sing beyond mankind. So, with my thesis that I'm currently developing, I'm particularly interested to raise those songs beyond mankind, which beyond the dominance of man, beyond homocentric oppression and planetary destruction. So my claim, my claim in one of my divisions is the observation that in the epoch of the Anthropocene, the relationship between nature and human subjectivity must substantially be reconsidered. And for that claim, I strongly build on ecofeminist thought, which shows that the current state of planetary destruction directs to male regimes of power based on the suppression of both nature and femininity, and also putting forth the highly problematic equation between nature and femininity in general. So what I want to do with my MA thesis now is first to investigate this equation, to see how it's developed over time, and also then with Freud and Heidegger, how this equation paved the way for conceptual subjectivity. And with the thesis is to then propose alternative, non-reductive, or one could say inclusive forms of thought and praxis, so as to imagine a more hierarchical feminine planetary coexistence that emerges from the thread-like entanglements that are mentioned in the poem. So about those fragile relations between nature and humans. So with that aim, the thesis is mainly rooted in Bracher-Ettinger's matrixal theory, which fundamentally questions the mindsets or the thinking practices of both psychoanalysis and philosophy, and also their oppressive relation to nature and to the feminine. So I'm really interested in departing from Freud and Heidegger. I'm quite interested in asking, how can I apply the matrixal theory in the context of the present ecological trauma? So methodologically, while I'm reviewing both Freud and Heidegger, I'm at the same time also counter reading and criticizing, in a way, them through Ettinger's matrixal theory. And I will also contrast her thought with contemporary concepts of nature and ecology. For instance, the notion of dark ecology, or nature as hyper-object, as it was reformulated by Timothy Morton. So I'm quite interested, actually, how also the Ettingerian matrixal actually goes beyond that view of a dark ecology, because it's actually suggesting something quite different. So structurally, my thesis will consist of three main parts. And what you perhaps have read, this is the draft for the first part, which I will probably rewrite within the next weeks. But the first part is mainly about introducing Freud and Heidegger, introducing their main concepts in a way that is possible within the framework of the thesis, and counter-reading their concepts with Brach-Ettinger's thought. So this is a kind of departing point. And the second part would then go more into the notion of ecology, and would be about introducing the contemporary discourse of nature and ecology, which I'm again counter-reading with Brach-Ettinger, but also with Felix Guattari, or the protagonists of the emergent fields of eco-psychology or environmental humanities. And the third part would then be the formulation of practical and artistic possibilities of the matrixal theory in facing the present state of planetary destruction. So what I think is really important, and I discussed on the question also with Brachet personally, so and she also agrees on that it's actually quite important to make her theory even more operative, and I'm trying to do that with a specific connection to ecology, and yeah, and additionally, additionally to these three parts, I'm aiming for testing and also applying my research with a site-specific performance. So, because I'm also not just working like theoretically, I'm also working as a performance artist, and I would be really interested in in investigating how the matrixal theory in relation to nature and ecology might become operative, and how that would look like, and how those performative investigations might actually then suggest different ways of thinking. So this is also my specific practice-based approach. And yeah, so to then actually present also the performative character of Braha's matrixal theory as a paradigm for an attitude towards life that includes both ethics and aesthetics. So on this basis, I'm hoping for that the thesis will be able to suggest a maybe even radical relational and coexisting form of thought and practice that might then, perhaps like metaphorically speaking, might be able to mediate that warmth of the thread suns above the grey-black wastes, as my title and the poem that I'm referring to suggests. So yeah, this would be in short what I'm aiming for, what my motivation is, also where I situate myself now in the context of the Anthropocene, where there's so much theory going on. But I think, and also again in discussion with Braha, that this this venture is actually really important to not stay any longer in the mindset of the Heideggerian, being towards death, which again becomes repeated also by the post-humanist discourse, but actually to formulate a different way of thinking that is not oriented towards death, but towards birth. So that would be, thank you.
incredible. Well done. Super, very clear. And love to open this up to folks who are here and would like to interject a question, an idea at this point. I know Salam from Iran, who has just joined an MA student, he read your work, and I wonder maybe Salam, if you would mind coming in and just maybe responding briefly. And you're muted, by the way. Yep, there you go.
Hello, Mr. Professor, and greeting from Iran. I just amazed by the Christopher research, and I want to admire the intellect position that Christopher took to look at the subject. With the first time that I opened just the Christopher research, I just amazed by the picture of Edvard Munch, if I'm right, toward the forest, and it just reminded me the sceneries of Hayao Miyazaki. If I'm afraid if you know the Japanese animator Miyazaki, I think that Christopher precisely described the relation between the Freud's theory and his research, but I don't get the Heidegger part clearly, maybe because of my lack of enough knowledge about Heidegger philosophy, but I'm really interested in the Christopher research, and I want to read more and more about his idea.
Yeah, thank you very much, Salman. Yeah, so the writing that I've shared with you, so it's basically a draft, as I mentioned before, and what was quite interesting also in my last discussion with Braha was that the draft, as it's written now, it is somehow a little neutral. It somehow presents somehow the facts, and it picks some it picks some aspects of Freud and some aspects of Heidegger, and somehow they are quite related to each other. Of course, they do not cover by any way the whole universe of Freud and Heidegger, but still it somehow points to some important aspects of them. So what I will do also within the next weeks is, like I said before, is to counter-read their positions also with Braha Ettinger's thoughts, and maybe also with other feminist authors, like we have Irigaray, we have also Felix Gatteriden and Völkerkorsen. So because in the first I had in mind to do it more chronologically, so to start with Freud and then Heidegger, and then in the first concept there was also Lacan and Levinas, and then finally to arrive at Braha's thought. And in the last meeting we somehow reframed that, because it would also be too much in a way for an MA thesis, but also perhaps it could, the framework of the thesis, it could just highlight aspects more superficially and might not be able to tell something really new. So in that regard, we decided more to focus on Freud and Heidegger, and but always to relate that to Braha's thoughts. So not to do it like in a linear way, but more to go into depth within one aspect. And this aspect could then, for instance, be this being towards death, which is one of the main concepts in Heidegger, and which somehow finds its counterpart in the Freudian death drive and life drive, so that basically human subjectivity is oriented in its whole existence and in its whole structuring towards death. And this is also a very male, or psychoanalytically you could say a very phallic logic that Bracha in her thinking is trying to question. And also I'm trying to do that with my own more artistic practice. So I think as the thesis is now, it will go more into depth with a very few concepts, so not with everything, but with just a few parts, but then to see those parts from very different angles, so that this might then be able to really present also something new, so that there is not the danger of repeating something that has been already said many times.